Hello, and welcome to a video that discusses how to build your PvM skills from ground zero up to a point where you can feel comfortable learning the Tombs of Amascut as well as any other raid that you want to learn. When I teach raids to players and I discuss with players who are looking to learn raids, the concerns that I see most prevalent are that they don't know how to switch their gear to the level that you need, and that they don't know how to do all the movement mechanics that they see in raids. They also just don't know where they should go to learn these mechanics. So the purpose of this video will be describing a general strategy for learning these mechanics through other PvM encounters that are in the game. In order to do so, we might also use some non-standard methods such as some of the kiting methods that you see Iron Men do for solo God Wars that you don't see too much in the world of mains unless you have max gear. We'll also end with a very quick discussion that will discuss some basic stats and good starting gear for bossing. If you want to see what a raid-specific gear layout would look like, then there's a great guide by Quick OSRS that goes over the Tombs of Amascut and the gear that you'll want to have there. Now before we get into it, I'm going to start making some short guides covering specific paths and phases in TOA once Jagex stops tweaking it every update. I mean, the 2 past weeks, we've seen 2 major updates. And I want to start doing the same thing for other raids and PvM experience, but not until after I finish the TOA stuff. So if you want to see any of that, I would highly suggest that you subscribe to the channel. A lot of this won't be coming at a very fast rate. I typically only make one video every 2 weeks, so be a little patient, but it will be up there in the future. We'll start by looking at each category first, starting with general player movement, and then dodging, and then switching, and at the end we'll bring it all together for a loose progression that will make you ready to learn raids. I would highly suggest that you turn the True Tile plugin on in RuneLite, and if you're not using RuneLite, then eventually this plugin will be in the main game under the Jagex client. They have committed to that, and hopefully we will see it soon. The easiest starting point for player movement and timing is Saradomin and God Wars, and you can do this either solo or duo. The method is simple enough: run around the room, play keep away, and shoot the boss. I find this method to be a little boring at its most basic level, but it really allows you to focus on your timing, which is one of the most important things with movement. The gear requirements are also really loose. A rune crossbow with some diamond bolts and D-hide is plenty. A dragon crossbow and a twisted buckler is obviously much better, but if you're using an armadillo crossbow, please sell it right now. Focusing on kiting methods to learn movement, the next more advanced one is the Bando 6-0 method. The gist of it is fairly similar: cut around the edge of the room and hit the boss. However, this time you have to be a lot more specific with your timing when you're clicking. I have a guide on this one that also demonstrates how to recover from any mistakes. I also include some learner setups into the guide, so I'll recommend that you go to that once you want to learn that. You can also finish off by learning any of the Zamrak methods or moving into any of the Bow of Ferdinand methods for either boss that we have covered. You can put all this together and have a very solid foundation on precision and timing. Now that we have that, let's look more into places that feature movement in the context of reacting and dodging. The most infamous dodging examples are the Corrupted Gauntlet and the Hollow Sepulchre, but we'll get to those eventually. Let's start with Vorkath though. If you want to learn how to Wookswalk, this will not only improve your kill speed, but it will get you a little more familiar with the game, and you already know how to do some timing if you've done a little bit of any of the God Wars methods, so this will be a little more approachable than it might have been in the past. And you can even use Vorkath's fireballs as a metronome to work with. Just make sure you have some spare cash lying around before you do this. Working our way up, I'll admit that the next 4 bosses on this list are not my personal favorites. They are typically looked down upon for various reasons. However, when I take learners through these raids, I look to see if they have KC at any of these bosses because the skills that you learn in them translate very well over into raids. The first one, the Grotesque Guardians, have some of the lowest entry requirements of any boss on this list. They don't require a lot of stats, they don't require a lot of cash, but they are a good place to practice any of the basics that you might use in everything else. There is dodging, there is switching, you even have to pay attention to your prayers. The starting skill requirements really aren't that high because the bosses only really have one punishing mechanic, and that one is relatively easy to avoid compared to a lot of the others on this list. The next 2 bosses are probably my least favorite in the entire game. However, they both have a lot of application and similar mechanics to some of the stuff you will see in raids, and they are Nex and Nightmare. Nex inspired Nightmare, and a lot of the Nex mechanics ended up inspiring a lot of what's in Chambers of Xeric, which eventually inspired some of the stuff that is in the other 2 raids. Not only do these bosses require a lot of dodging and reacting, but they also start to work in switches, and you have to do a lot of movement around the room in order to optimize how you fight them. And now that we've talked about those 2, let's talk about the heavy hitters. Plain and simple, the Hollow Sepulchre is the best place to go if you want to learn precise movement and really practice it. The more in-depth floors do have high requirements, but the first 3 floors are a really great place to start reacting and start optimizing your pathing. And then finally, the Gauntlet. The gauntlet forces you to combine everything that we will talk about in this video into one display of player movement, dodging, and reacting. Put simply, if you can handle the gauntlet and you can handle everything involved to the point where you're getting pretty smooth kills, then you can handle anything that you are required to learn in raids. If you want a good starting place for learning the gauntlet, I have another video on my channel that will talk to you about the basics of player and tornado movement, and also how to apply very basic strategies that do not require tricks or precise situations. Instead, they are very top level and they can be applied throughout the fight even when the tornadoes are not out. And finally, let's talk about switching gear and prayers. This is commonly one of the most daunting things for players that are trying to learn this, but it is a lot less important than the other things we've done, and a lot of the things we've already mentioned will involve some degree of switching. But if you do want something that focuses slowly on gear changes, I'd recommend the Demonic Gorillas first. You can start with a 2-way switch and work your way up to a 4 or 5-way switch. I find this to be one of the most fun things to do in the game because it's really engaging, and I can bring as much of a switch as I want to, so if I'm having a day where I feel like clicking a little less, I'll bring fewer items. The next boss will be the Dagonoth Kings. You do not need good switches to go here. Quite simply, you can take all the time in the world to do your switches, and it is just that much relaxing and that little punishment compared to some of the other stuff. This is one of my favorite things to do in the game, and I started my PvM experience with DKs, Sarah God Wars, and Zulrah. Was my base level. Speaking on Zulrah, if you really want to work on having fast or long switches, this is definitely the place that you want to go, assuming that you are okay with putting the effort in to learn it. Now, I will say the loot here isn't that great, and it is a lot to learn, so it's going to be very optional, but this is where you want to go if you want to apply all the switches that you will ever need for any PvM encounter in the game. So we've covered all of the bosses now. Let's synthesize this into a list that works kind of almost in a tier sense. The easiest bosses to start out with, because they give you the most basic foundation, are the Demonic Gorillas, the Dagonoth Kings, Grotesque Guardians, Sarah God Wars, and Vorkath. You can also add the first 3 floors of the Hollowed Sepulchre, because they give great agility experience. You can also throw in some of the unmentioned Slayer bosses, such as Hydra, because that again gets you focused with a little more of the basic mechanics of the game. Once you're comfortable with that tier of bosses, add in stuff like Bandos, Nex, Nightmare, Zami, and Zulrah. Again, the kiting methods for the Godware stuff. If you can get to this tier, also try to look at a quest cape if you don't have one already. I'll shout out my walkthrough on how to cheese through entry mode top for anyone that still needs to do that. Trust me guys, you can handle that if you are in this tier. And also, this is the point at where you can start learning TOA, and maybe Chambers of Xeric too, but I would prefer you start with TOA because it's a lot less to learn, and you can work your way up a lot smoother than you can at Chambers, where you just have to go straight into an entire raid encounter. But, as I say, Overkill is okay, and the 2 Overkill places to go are the Corrupted Gauntlet and the Hollowed Sepulchre. If you can handle those 2 guys, you could do anything in the game. You could even start learning Inferno at that point. So we aren't going to go into any raid-specific gear or requirements, but we will hit on some ending notes that will talk about some basic stats, such as just having base 80s to start any of the bosses on this guide. You're going to want higher as you move into higher difficulties. The most important things to get for gear are 77 Prayer, Rigor, and Augury. Augury is the most criminally underrated thing in the game. If the offensive stats don't help you, then trust me, the defensive stats are amazing. But for actual gear, stuff you can equip, the best item to start with is the Imbued Slayer Helm, and you'll eventually want an Amulet of Fury. These 2 are the most all-around items we'll talk about, but let's go into a melee setup first. The most basic level will be having a Whip, a Dragon Defender, Berserker Ring, Fire Cape, Fighter Torso, Helm of Nadesnot, and some tank armor. It's really that simple, but you do want to move on to get a Stab and Crush weapon eventually, and the 2 most budget items for that are the Abyssal Dagger and the Sarachnis Cudgel. Eventually, you can upgrade to a Hasta, but the Cudgel and the Abyssal Dagger are 2 more criminally underrated items. Now, everybody hard focuses on the Blowpipe for range, but if you can't afford that off the bat, then don't worry about it. Just start with the Dragon Crossbow and work your way up to the Blowpipe. You'll also want a good shield to go along with your Dragon Crossbow, such as an Odium Word or a Twisted Buckler. Now, going into the armor, God Hide is plenty. If you want to get Void range, then it is good in some situations, but no matter what you do, do not buy Armadillo Armor or an ACB. There is something better to spend your money on at every level of the game. Now let's move into magic. The real crux of your setup is going to be the Trident of the Seas and the Occult Necklace. Your Mystic Armor is going to be about where you want to start, and you want to upgrade to the Trident of the Swamp before you upgrade to Aram's Robes. I'll also mention that Void Mage is amazing prior to getting Aram's and a Tormented Bracelet. Once you have these items, the next main upgrades are going to be things such as Bandos Armor and all of these Zenyte pieces. Everything past that tends to be something that's a little more situational and a little more dependent on what you're doing. I'm not going to go into that because we've reached about everything I wanted to go into this guide. And now that we're finally ready and at the end of this guide, I really would suggest learning the tombs first. I already mentioned this briefly, but the fact that you can go in entry mode and learn small chunks of the raid and work your way up very slowly is the reason this is so learner-friendly. A lot of people are saying that this isn't a learner-friendly raid because they're going about the wrong way and just trying to rush into getting to 150s. You have to work up at your own pace, and you have to focus on learning everything before you do so. Alright, well that's it for this guide. If you've made it to the end, thank you very much for watching. And again, if you want to subscribe so you can see future content, feel free to do so.